So we're looking at Wright in the mostly in the 1920s. And this is Taliesin East. I'll tell you what that is in a minute. It's a compound where Wright lived. And it's in Spring Green, Wisconsin, where his family owned land. So in 1902, two of his mother's sisters had a school, and Wright goes to building for that. And Vincent Scully, interestingly, I put his book online for you on the LMS. And it's a very brief book. It's about 20 pages. And then the rest is illustrations. And Scully did a book in the same series about Louis Kahn. And he sort of shows the parallels in their career development. So here's Kahn early in his mature career doing the Trenton Jewish Community bathhouse. And here you see these strong structural forms in the corners defining the spaces. And you see Wright's strong structural forms in the corners here. Now, in around 1912, Frank Lloyd Wright ran off to Europe left his wife and 6 kids. They were pretty much grown up by then. Left his wife and ran off to Europe with Ma Cheney, who was the wife of a client. Neither Wright's wife nor Cheney's husband would give them divorces. So they went off to Europe, and it was a huge scandal. I mean, today, that's what everybody does. Trump is on, his 3rd marriage or whatever. Reagan had a couple marriages. The Clintons are a whole scandal machine. And no one thinks anything of it, but it was a big deal then. And it was in all the newspapers, and it undermined Wright's ability to get work. Now, while in Europe, Wright worked on what's called the Wasmuth Folio, which is a publication of his work, which was a big deal because today, scan your drawings and put them on the internet. You're done. You're published. They didn't even have color photography then, and they didn't have color reproduction in magazines. And the architectural magazines were not about to do anything with Frank Lloyd Wright. So he had to do his own book, and a European publisher, a Dutch publisher, did that. He came back from Europe, he and Ma Cheney, and he built this compound, Taliesin. Well, it was called Taliesin after a Welsh poet. Taliesin means shining brow. And it later became Taliesin East because he built another one in Arizona that we'll look at next week. And this is beautiful country in Wisconsin, dairy country, lush green, but there's 6 feet of snow in the winter. So he figured he'd be happier in the winter in Arizona. And this had 2 fires burning much of it down. So what we see here is not from 1910. He keeps rebuilding it. And he's off in Chicago around 1915. Don't write those dates down. I don't have them exact. I had them in slides earlier. But he's off in Chicago. A servant goes berserk and kills Ma Cheney and her children and burns the place down. So that was a quite tragic event in Wright's life. Later, Wright decides to have an apprenticeship. He didn't like the word school. So you could pay a modest amount of money and go there and work. They grew their own food, they did their own cooking, they built the buildings. So it was real involvement and work on any projects that Wright had, although for much of that time he didn't have much work and they worked on projects as opposed to real buildings. And then later that continued as an office after Wright's death, and they do an extension off of that school, which is built in the 1950s to be a drafting room. So, beautiful, lush grounds. Rolling hills, lots of green, low-sloped overhanging roofs, cantilevers, typical of Wright's work. This is a walkway he built for himself and go out and look at the surrounding landscape. Now you come up this road and drive into the compound. Come up here, drive in, and this is the garage we just saw. And then there's a courtyard. So we come in here. Interestingly, a lot of Wright's work, when he had a wealthy client, was very high quality. But when the money wasn't there, he just slapped things together. This is stud walls, wood lath, chicken wire, and stucco smeared over it. And it's fallen apart. I've lectured at Taliesin West, and we stayed, my wife and I, she came with me, stayed in one of the houses that Wright used for himself. My wife is into celebrities, so they said, oh, you can sleep in Frank Lloyd Wright's bed. So she thought that was really cool. So, but you look at the details, the kitchen counters and everything, very sloppily put together, just sort of slapped together. And Louis Kahn, on the other hand, has a real, Miesian sense of detailing. I should even attribute to Mies and credit Kahn with it. But this stuff is, today, a lot of it's peeling. It's one of the courtyards. And then you go inside. This is a tour group I was with, so that's my picture. And you see this low slope roof. He's into this quality of it, sort of like cupped hands containing you. And here, this is furniture added long after Wright died. These are the chairs from the Martin House. So these were custom made for the Martin House, and you can now buy them. And here's some of the rolling landscape. This is a little chapel by Silsby. Silsby is a shingle-style architect. First architect Wright worked for, and then he eventually moved on to Louis Sullivan, who was the most important progressive architect of the day. And at that point, Wright was in the mix of cutting-edge stuff. And this is a chapel Silsby did for the family, and this is was at one point Frank Lloyd Wright's grave. He's been moved to Taliesin West. Now, one of the few projects he does during this time is called Midway Gardens. So this is in Chicago. We get these Midwestern cities Milwaukee, Chicago, they tend to be very German and Germanic. Lots of Germans, lots of Scandinavians, Swedes, and not to be cliched about any ethnic groups, but Germans drink beer. So what you do on the weekend is you go to the beer garden. We're about to have Oktoberfest coming up. There's an Oktoberfest celebration near where I live. We get bratwurst and beer. So this is at a time when people, this would be what you would do with a date or young people who are going to go out on, a Saturday afternoon. And here's what we've got here. We were just looking at here. And then there's a huge open courtyard here with tables. And then here's where you buy your food in surrounding booths. Here we go. So here's the entrance with these towers. Here are the tables. And here are the food concessions. Now, 1913-14, look at this geometric rectilinear floating planes, flat roofs. This becomes very influential on the European architects. This is where, before this, Walter Gropius is doing German expressionism, kind of curvy stuff. And after this, and after seeing the Wassermann Folio, Gropius is doing very rectilinear stuff in his Bauhaus building. And I showed you previously when we were looking at the one of the houses that Wright published in the folio, how Mondrian and all this German rectilinear abstract art came out of Wright. Even more comes out of here, as we'll see in a minute. So it's a huge complex. And then we get Prohibition. You can tell me what was Prohibition?
No drinking, no alcohol.
Right, so it's the 1930s women's temperance movements. They were tired of their husbands getting their paycheck, going to the bar, spending all the money on beer and coming home drunk and beating them up. So they figured we'll solve this by outlawing alcohol. And all it did was increase drinking because, everybody was into, well, how can I get some illegal alcohol? So you have speakeasies, you have the rise of the modern gangster. Al Capone was a distributor of alcohol in Chicago. But anyway, all the legal places shut down. So this was torn down as a result of Prohibition. So we don't have any color photography. It was torn down in the 30s. We have color postcards. Here are these tables, and the chairs are these really cool things. Extremely lightweight, almost as though it's made out of wires. And there was a very popular chair in the early 50s called the butterfly chair. Sort of has that kind of spirit. So you could get this with this is leather, but it would typically have canvas. But this is in this modernist idea of minimalism, high strength, lightweight, new materials. And that's what Wright is already doing here in the 19 teens. And it was filled with murals, again, which we don't have color. This is a modern guess of what the colors were. Now, look at this sort of decorative abstract art pattern with all these circles. Here on the 1930s, 20 years later, is Rudolph Bauer, Kandinsky, exact same thing. Here's a coaster for your drink that you can buy. Some enterprising person approached the Taliesin Foundation, which owns all the rights to all of Wright's stuff, and said, "Can I make decorative doodads out of Wright's design?" So how many people have seen Frank Lloyd Wright stuff in a museum shop? So calendars, notebooks, pen and pencil set, desk lamp, everything you can imagine, including coasters for your drinks, are done in these Frank Lloyd Wright patterns that come from various Wright projects. So here we have the rectilinear geometric qualities of the architecture and these geometric decoratives being very influenced on much later, 1930s, European modern art and modern architecture. Now, 1915, although it's a long period, Wright gets invited to do the Imperial Hotel in Japan. So it's a huge hotel. Now, 1950s, this is way too out of date and way too small. So this is an addition to this hotel. And then about 30 years ago, the whole thing is torn down and a modern hotel is built. So no one wants to stay in a 100-year-old hotel. Interestingly here, in this very large project, Wright reaches to symmetry. So a formal symmetrical arrangement, perhaps reminiscent of Beaux-Arts design. And again, we don't have very much color photography. We do, I'll show you why in a minute. But here's a model. It's torn down before. It's in pretty bad shape by the 80s when it's torn down. So, but we have a reflecting pond here, drive in, then we have an extensive lobby, and then restaurant, and then here are the rooms on these double-loaded corridors. So rooms here, and then lobby facilities here. Nobody can really figure out the style. It's very heavy-handed. A lot of it is cut volcanic stone, some precast concrete, lots of brick. Sometimes it's referred to as Mayan. It doesn't particularly look Japanese. It doesn't look like Wright's other stuff. Now what happened was rich Japanese wanted to preserve culture, bought and rebuilt the hotel in a park, the lobby. So that's what we do have color pictures of. And here again you see the rectilinear geometric forms, some Art Deco influence. Here's the lobby. Now, big story. Immediately upon the hotel being finished, Tokyo suffers one of its worst earthquakes, and much of the city burns down. So you go back to that time, Tokyo would have been built mostly in wood, and people would use charcoal braziers to cook. So you have an earthquake, it breaks the gas lines, it knocks everybody's cooking braziers over, and the whole city's on fire. Most major buildings were destroyed. Frank Lloyd Wright's building did not suffer a crack. And it totally rode out the earthquake, and they were able to pump water from the reflecting pond to wet down the roofs to keep sparks flying from setting it on fire. And it was used as a headquarters for rescue operations. Here's how he did that. Right? When you build a house, the perimeter all the way around, you go down 3 feet, you pour concrete, you then build up with concrete blocks to, let's say, 2 feet above grade line. You put a sill on that, and then you do your stud wall on that sill going up. That's the footings. Why do you go down 3 feet? So frost doesn't get under your house. You don't want frost to get under your house because it's going to freeze and thaw, expand, and crack everything. Crack the floor, concrete floor of the basement, stuff like that. So that acts as insulation. It also provides stability for, earth moving. Wright didn't like to build that way. When we get to Usonian houses, we'll see he compacts the ground, then he puts 6 inches of crushed rock, and then he pours the slab on that. So that the slab, the ground's going to move underneath due to frost, heaving and frost. Wright's theory was the slab will float like it's on a bed of ball bearings on this crushed rock. So that's his approach. But he does something somewhat similar here, where you have an upper clay layer and then down to the main earth layers. He puts pilings down only so far. So the earth is moving under here while this is staying still. So he's rooted in this layer, and this layer is moving around. And he does his masonry walls up from there. Now, I have this set of dishes in my office, and if I find them, I'll bring them up when we talk about Wright's ornament. These are the dishes he did for the Imperial Hotel. You can still buy them. Wait, you get consumer versions. Hotel versions are extra heavy, so they can be banged around in the dishwasher and stuff like that. But it's really elegant stuff. You sometimes see these in Museum of Art. You can get this whole set. Why this red on the coffee cup or teacup? Hide women's lipstick. That's what he said. But he's using it all over. So. Okay, Frank Lloyd Wright's, we can call them concrete tile houses or concrete block houses. So I'll try to stick with tile. Let's see how they're made in a minute. First one is the Millard House, nicknamed La Miniatura, in Pasadena. In an architecturally rich neighborhood. And this is the backyard. You enter at the sidewalk level, which is here, and then the bedrooms are on the top floor, and you go down to the living room. So we enter up here, and we go down to the double-heighted living room. And here's this pond here. So it's quite anonymous against the street, just these wooden doors to the parking, mostly blank walls. And then it opens up here. The sun is really intense. Pasadena is desert, and it's lush only because of artificial irrigation. So he's using these perforated tiles to break up the light that comes in. We are in this double-heighted living room on the balcony looking down. And the original owner was an antiques dealer. So these are the tiles. They can either be patterned or have these perforations in them. And here's what he's doing. Each tile is about 18 inches on the side and has a half round scoop on each edge. As a result, when you put two together, these two half rounds become a round hole. In that round hole, he stuffs grout and puts 1/4-inch rebar. He does this twice to get a air space, which is typical in masonry wall construction. So typically you have brick, space, block in masonry construction. Now, this is around the same time as Corbu's early houses. And let's pick on Corbu a bit. So here, you might or might not guess how this is constructed, but the materials are pretty clear. These are 3-inch thick concrete tiles, and that's what we see with joints. Some of them are patterned. Of course, the Europeans put right down for having decorative patterns. Now, how does this work? And the answer is, you would never in a million years figure it out. So here's what's going on here. For example, this wall is probably supported on the floor slab, but is this glass window holding up this wall? What's holding this up? So what Corbu does is, he's got the columns. Columns support a floor slab. Floor slab supports an edge beam. Sitting on the edge beam is concrete block Big double layer masonry wall with hollow. And then he stuccos it over, smears stucco on it. Okay, that's the bottom part. And it's got the window. Now here, column continues up, supports the roof slab, another edge beam. Then he has steel rods coming down, holding a beam here, and the masonry wall is sitting on that beam, and then it's all stuccoed over. So much for any structural honesty. And even if this was left exposed, you could look at it and probably figure out, oh, okay, I see a beam here, I see blocks here, I see a beam here, but you don't see that. He stuccos it over and pretends it's all poured in place concrete, which is not. So that's a contrast between Wright and Corbu and the other Europeans around the same time. Now Wright does a series of these. This one's the Stower House. And when I was out in LA some years ago, today it's really easy, right? You just put Stower House in your phone in Google Maps. It'll get you right there. But we were figuring it out. We went to all the houses and get to Stower House, and right here is a for sale sign. Oh, cool. Probably out of my price range. Well, we'll see that is in fact the case in a minute. And here's a rendering. This is my photo when it was for sale. And this is the interior after a recent renovation. Now this is the Ennis house. And again, I was really lucky. I got here, I was like, why are all these, the whole street in front of it was parked cars? You could hardly find a parking system. Turned out we arrived just on the day they had the tour. They open, like once a month for a tour. So this is in Los Angeles on a hill. The hill comes down here, looking out over the city. So you come in here to a courtyard. Garage is here, guest house here, main house here, and a swimming pool here. This is the courtyard that car comes into. Lloyd likes to use the spot glass corners. Today we put a little bead of clear silicone there, but it's just two pieces of glass touching. Anybody have an idea where you've seen the interior of this house?
Where? Similar ones?
The detective's kitchen in the first Blade Runner movie.
Yeah. Right.
So this has been in lots of movies. It's a favorite for like futurist sci-fi type effects in movies. Now the blocks on the interior are good shape. We'll get to this, but you can tell this stuff is in trouble. So we'll get to how these were made in a minute. So here's one in Oklahoma, Richard Lloyd Jones' house later. And here there's no ornament. So it has a very stark effect. And he has a couple of extensions sticking out.
What's the name of the house? This one?
Richard Lloyd Jones. And again, Wright likes to break down the difference between inside and outside. The corners are cut glass, no mullions, so it amplifies the effect of space flowing from inside to outside. Okay, so here we are back at Innis, and here it is in big trouble. So, Wright's vision was he sees these as prototypes for what could be mass produced. And what would happen would be you'd have a factory making these precast in the factory. If you do it right, if you cast concrete in a factory, it's as durable as stone. What you do is you have vibrating beds for the forms, so it settles everything in densely. You might not even use minimal water. You might not use water at all. You might use steam. Because the water sets the concrete and then it evaporates. Well, when it leaves space. Rainwater gets into that space, freezes, expands, and cracks the concrete. There's a term for that. It's called a sidewalk. Sidewalks are always, they just replaced about a half a dozen patches of sidewalk at the apartment between here and main campus. If you look outside our entrance, you'll see where they've done some patches. So sidewalk maybe lasts 20 years, and then bits and pieces of it get redone. This was, but if you can cast it in a factory, it's very durable. If you cast it on site, what Wright did was he had wooden forms on the site. He then had a wheelbarrow in which they shoveled the sand and the cement and the aggregate and a garden hose and a hoe to mix it and then dump it in the forms. Well, it hardens up solid, but it, 10 years later it's going to start disintegrating. So this is what this stuff starts to look like. This is what it looks like new. Here it is. Mold growing in it, cracks. So in the Ennis house, they did something we don't like to do, which is a epoxy. It's epoxy paint. What's the most beautiful poured-in-place concrete in the New York area? So this is exposed poured-in-place concrete, and I remember my materials and methods teacher saying, you can't, in the North, you can do it in California because it doesn't freeze, but in the Northeast you can't have poured-in-place exposed concrete, quote unquote. So one of my classmates says, what about the TWA building? And my professor said, "Oh, you can do it." You can just see I.M. Pei's Kips Bay Apartments starting to, what's going to happen in another 20 years. So TWA was closed some years ago. TWA airline is gone. This is useless as a terminal because it's way too small for today's terminals. So what they're doing at this very moment is building a hotel. Well, first of all, up here is JetBlue terminal. So you go to, if you fly JetBlue, get out of the taxi, go across the street and look over the parapet. You can see this from the roof. And then right here, they're building a hotel. So this will be the lobby for the hotel. So we can use it again. But every few years, since it was shut, the Port Authority will announce a tour. It's going to be open Saturday. The chief engineer will be there. So I go to those, and sure enough, this is covered with epoxy. We put this, it's like hard rubber, and looks beautiful from a distance. You get up close and say, "Oh, that's what they did." And he says, "I'd rather we hadn't done that, because now what do? You can't peel it off." So, but he says, so far so good. The only leaks they have is at the windows. So this is so far never leaked. But all this Corbu concrete, it's not a good idea. Now, let me tell you why we have rich people. Ron Berkey bought the Ennis House for $4.5 million, and he's spending $10 million to restore it. That's okay, because he's worth $2.8 billion. He can afford it. So these White Houses are now being bought by people. They're considered very collectible. Most people find them an absolute joy to live in. And they, but you have to be rich to restore them. Wright's own house, which is now a museum and tourist center. So you get to Oak Park, you go to the Frank Lloyd Wright house, and from there the tours go to, there's a dozen of his houses in the neighborhood, plus Unity Temple. Well, that house, Wright would steal bricks on the way home from work to build it from construction sites. Mm-hmm. And to save money, he just built it on grade. Just put the bricks down on the dirt. Well, it is sinking, cracking, rotting. They had to lift the whole thing up, put in footings, and put it back down again. $3 million. That was 30 years ago, so today it would probably be $10 million. So Wright does a lot of adventurous things that we can learn from, but we want to be careful that we don't emulate them. Louis Kahn, some of his buildings have had troubles, but not really. I mean, most of them is because they're 60 years old, and buildings get major renovations and repointing of bricks and stuff like that after 60 years. But Kahn really tried to do it right. I'm sure he would have, put in the footings if he had the money. Go to the Millard House. It's owned by David Zander, president, co-founder of Morton Jacob Zander video production. Joe Silver bought the, so when I saw that for sale sign, I guess they were asking $800,000 because it was, I guess it was around then. He did very extensive restoration. He produced Lethal Weapon, Die Hard, and The Matrix. So these people can, these houses tend to be bought by people who can afford to be patrons of them. Now here's Wright's vision. He had a huge project, San Marco in the desert. It was going to be done in these concrete blocks and concrete tiles. And they were all going to be done in a, they were going to build a factory to do them so it'd be high quality. And then the depression, the stock market crashed, the depression hit, and it was never built. Here's a 3D printed model of it. So recall we looked at the Larkin building in virtual reality, in video. But if they did the video right, it should be easy to adopt it to virtual reality. And that and 3D printing, and we're beginning to be able to experience some of this stuff. Well, one of Wright's students, or apprentices, got the commission to do the Arizona Biltmore Hotel. And he asked Wright to help him. So here's Wright not getting top billing, not being able to totally control the design, but they got along great, and you can see a lot of Wright's touches here. And boy, is a room expensive here. We were staying in the area. I said, let's spend the night at the Biltmore. Oh, I guess not. They know that it has that cachet value. So one other house at this time, which is not concrete tile, but it's the same time, is the Hollyhock House, or Barnsdale House. So Mrs. Barnsdale was a rich heiress, and she wanted to build an arts community. It would be theater, residences, artists, etc. And she had Wright build her house, and then she lost interest and went off to do something else. So the whole thing never got built, just her house. So here we're looking at here, and it's got a courtyard, and it's quite rich spatially in section. Now again, something Kahn would never do. This is concrete block stuccoed over. This is stud wall construction with mesh stuccoed over. And if Kahn's going to do that, he's going to tell you, this is this and this is that. Here, it's just, you know, it's all for an effect. The fact that these are two very different things doesn't matter to me. Now, this is ornament that looks like hollyhocks, plants. And so that's how it gets its name, the Hollyhock House. And it's also sometimes referred to as Frank Lloyd Wright's Mayan period. And, you know, it looks a little bit Mayan. Here's some of the black and white photos done at the time it was built. And here, Wright is giving up much of his ornament. It's just a little bit of geometric ornament remaining in his stained glass. Here it is, hollyhock plants. And there's a whole analysis done of these fireplaces, earth, air, fire, and water, somehow. I heard a woman give a paper on that at a conference once, but I don't remember everything she said. Okay, so now we're going to look at a couple of architects who have, shall we say, some parallels with Wright. They may or may not be influenced by Wright, some are personal friends of Wright, but there are parallels. So first of all is Green and Green. And they're two brothers who grew up in California, went to MIT, which at the time had a kind of a Beaux-Arts curriculum. And they intended to return home. And they said, this Beaux-Arts stuff doesn't make any sense in California. We're a whole different culture. So they pioneered a kind of what's sometimes called craftsman style. Although craftsman style usually means more modest houses, and these are not modest. They do several of these. This is the most famous one, the Gamble House. This is Gamble of Procter & Gamble. So this is rich people's house. And again, today, so now we're standing, here's the sidewalk. Here's the entrance. If we go down the street, and then on our side of the street is Frank Lloyd Wright's Millard House. And if we go over here and look down the cliff and then up the cliff on the side of the cliff here is Richard Neutra's Lobell House. So it's a hot spot. If you're anywhere near Pasadena, you want to get here because it's 3 for 1. On top of that, this house is, you can get tours. So we see these low-sloped overhanging roofs, horizontality. So that's reminiscent of what we see in Wright. But it's not as modern in feel. Now notice on the roof, these rafters are extending beyond the edge of the roof. You can tell how much by the shadow here. And totally decorative, not a good idea, because you'd want the ends of these rafters are going to suck up water, because it's that's where the grain of the wood is. And you'd want the roof to protect that, not have it project on the roof. But they want it aesthetically. So most of those have been cut off and replacements put there. Now this is done in redwood, so redwood is very durable, but the weather will eventually get it. Now these are what's called sleeping balconies. So this is built before air conditioning. Gets very hot in the summer. You throw your bedding out through the door and sleep on the balcony. And then the railing of the balcony allows the breeze to come through, but protects you visual privacy. And here we can see it does not have an open plan. There are returns. but it does have big openings, so the space does flow one to another. But it's definitely a box. It's got the corners. So Wright would put the window right here and would do away with this return to get this flow. Green and green are not doing that. So we come up these steps. There's a magnificent Tiffany Tree of Life stained glass door. You come in here. There's an incredible stair here. This is the main living room. Fireplace with Tiffany glass, incredible wood details, and then dining and kitchen. There's a section by Green and Green. I didn't make this bigger because it's too low res. So here we come from the sidewalk. Now we can see the entrance. It was in shadow before. It was one of the sleeping balconies. So we come up here, and here's this incredible. If you wanted to sell this door, it'd probably be a couple $1,000,000. Now these are shingles, and these shingles are 3 feet long. So there's a huge overlap. And that built-up overlap provides the insulation, mostly for the heat. It'll get cold at night, particularly in the winter. See, desert is very hot in the daytime, very cold at night. Today we would just use 8 inches of fiberglass. So we come inside, and we start seeing the incredible woodworking details. So now we've come in, here's the living room here, dining room here. We're looking back at that door. The stair that we'll see in a minute is right here. And we see this incredible rich woodwork. And the Green and Green would get a telegraph or a messenger message from the lumber yard. We just got a huge mahogany log in. I think you guys want to come and see it. They rush over there and they say, that's great. We want to cut in the following way. We're going to use it right here for this detail. So this incredible attention to detail. So here's again the door. We're now looking at the living room. Here's the fireplace. Here's what's called a cloud detail. It's from Chinese architecture. It's uplifted. So it's making a kind of truss beam for the span. This is glass against masonry, again by Tiffany. Here we see a little bit of the stair. And here's the stair. There are a couple of these stairs in a couple of the houses. Now, this is decorative, but it's also functional. This structural piece here and this piece here are then strapped together, wedged tight, and if they could slide against each other, they would work. They wouldn't work together. The fact that they can't slide makes it as though it were one piece this deep. What keeps them from sliding is this wedge. So it's all, very crafty details. Here you can see this detail again of strapping these together to get a stronger effect. So here's the iron strap tying them together, and here's the wedge keeping them from sliding. Light fixture, leather band, and glass by Tiffany. Now, here's Frank Lloyd Wright's house about 10 years earlier. And we come in, Wright doesn't have the budget for incredible details, but see what he's doing. This is looking kind of crafty, but it's not. Everything is rectilinear. Everything is cut the way the saw would cut it. Clean, rectilinear, geometric shapes, showing you it was cut by a mechanical saw. This is telling you it was hand finished. The saw doesn't give you these rounded edges. Handcraft gives you these rounded edges. So Wright is signaling machine age, green and green or not. Now, eventually, this went out of style. People wanted clean, white. This is dark, people felt. And so, in the later houses, green and green, expand this white plaster and decrease the dark wood. But doesn't help. They go out of fashion and they end their office. The Gambles had retired from, Mr. Gamble retired from being Procter & Gamble, but then by the 1950s, they were really old, and they couldn't keep up the house anymore, so they're going to move to a small place they could handle. And the house was not listed for sale, but real estate agents knew about it. So an agent brought a young couple, and they get the tour of the house. Oh, everything's nice, everything's nice. As they're leaving, Mrs. Gamble overhears the wife saying to the husband, "But it's so dark." And he says, "Don't worry, we'll paint everything white." And Mrs. Gamble overhears him and says, "Excuse me, this house is not for sale." So it was given to USC, University of Southern California. And it's a museum. And USC runs the tours, maintains the house. And they also, when they have like guest lectures, will live here if they're staying for a week or something. Because someone has to live in a house. Someone has to flush the toilets and run the sink. You can't just leave it. It's like a living organism. You have to keep the plumbing moving and identifying problems. You can't just... I had a late 60s R69S BMW motorcycle, one of the great classics. And I sprayed everything with WD-40 and put it in a chicken shed in my parents' house. And a cousin of mine is visiting my parents and said, "You can't do that." And he was a motorcycle dealer. So I said, "Fine, it's yours." It's now the coolest motorcycle around. He's totally restored it. But you can't just let it sit there. You know, it's going to, even though I sprayed it, it's going to start to rust. And the oil in the crankcase will solidify, and weird things will happen after 10 years or so. So this house is well taken care of. All the silverware is there. All the tablecloths are there. So if you get the tour, you can open these huge drawers where they have the tablecloths and see the original linen. So one of the Green brothers, I don't know one from the other, retired to Charles Green. Great, I looked it up. Did a house much later in Carmel, California. So if I sometimes go to events or make presentations at Taliesin Institute, which is in Big Sur, sort of halfway between San Francisco and LA. So you have to fly to either San Francisco or LA. and then you drive. It's a Big Sur. And driving along, and it's the most magnificent, it's unbelievable. It's the Pacific Coast Highway, the cliffs over the Pacific Ocean. Taliesin Institute is unbelievable. So you're driving along the highway, and oh my God, there it is. So I'm not the kind of people who go and like knock on somebody's door and say, hey, I'm an architectural historian, can I see your house? But don't hesitate to do that. A lot of people welcome it. Particularly a house like this, they're not going to get people all day, every day. But this is all done with stone. They're kind of rich with some stone that he had in the wood. And in a way, it sort of comes out of the cliffs. Okay, that's Green and Green. This is Bruce Goff. So, Goff was a prodigy, did a building when he was like 16, a church, and then launched his career. He was in Frank Lloyd Wright's part of the world. He was in Oklahoma, near Arizona. And he and Wright were friends, and very fortuitous. They sort of, Wright put his fingers in some of Goff's work. Goff got Wright one of his most important commissions. So Goff's most famous house, 1951-57, Bavinger House. And it's a spiral, like a shell. So you come in, there's a spiraling space, and then growing out of the central support are a series of pods where the beds are. So they're the bedrooms. So the house is made out of local stone in a spiraling form, central shaft, and then, we can't see it here, let's see if we can get a shot where we see it. Well, here you can see it. Coming off the shaft are cables, high-strength steel cables, which support the roof. These cables are Army surplus. So this is 5 years after World War II, and you could get everything. I mean, the military ordered, a bazillion of everything. So, like, maybe they ordered 10 million little knapsacks for gas masks. So, we used to go to the Army-Navy surplus store. When I was a kid, I'd get my boots or my backpack or you get a fishing kit or a knife or whatever. It was all Army surplus. So these cables were used in airplanes to control the flaps. So now we have fly-by-wire, which means it's done electronically, but you'd actually move something in the plane and have pull a wire to move the flaps up or down. So very high strength stainless steel wire wouldn't corrode, and they're using that. Here's the bedrooms. There's a spiraling space. And then the walls are made of local stone. I think one of the kids fell out of bed, so they put this netting up. And then, this shows up in a couple of Goff's projects, but there's an optical factory nearby, and they start with these big chunks of glass. And there occasionally are defects in the glass, so they throw them away. So these are these chunks of glass. He's using like big blocks of stone with the glass. So when this got built, oh, here we go. You can see the wires here. Here you see the glass. Here's the glass. Here's the wires. Now, when this house got built, all the neighbors ridiculed the Bavengers, but it got written up in Life magazine, and the Bavengers charged 50 cents, which would have been like $5 today, to tour the house and paid for it. So they got a free house. Goff's most important client was Price, and Price was the Playboy son of an oil pipeline company, This is a family-owned oil pipeline company, Price Company, and while he was unmarried, he built this ultimate Playboy hangout. So one of the fads in those days was what's called a conversation pit. So you'd make a hole in the living room, and that becomes a seating area. And then the wall, this was all white carpeting, and this is goose feathers glued to the wall. This is simply strings of plastic making an effect. This wall is made out of coal. And coal can be, big chunks of coal, if it's hard coal. It's very shiny and crystal-like. There's a little bit of a Polynesian effect here. And this is as undisciplined as this looks, and it was added on to over the years. It's more disciplined than Goff wanted it. Price would check with Frank Lloyd Wright, who made them make it a little bit more geometric, and Goff was annoyed about that. But I don't know if you recall, I don't have it here, but Wright did the Price Tower, which is his skyscraper, and what happened was the company wanted an office building. So they went to Bruce Goff, and Goff said, Wright never did get to build his skyscraper. Why don't you have Wright do it? So that's how Wright got his commission. So now let me just, I've got a external battery on here, and it makes my silencer not work. But I can go to Do Not Disturb. Now, Goff lived in Bartlesville, Oklahoma, and taught at the University of Oklahoma. I know a bit about this because some of my colleagues from years ago were students of Goff. So, it's interesting. When you go to a school, you absorb a culture. Who are the important architects of your school? What's the approach of your school? Who does your school look to? Like my school, we didn't look at Frank Lloyd Wright. In the University of Oklahoma, they looked at Frank Lloyd Wright. It's interesting meeting people from, when you get out of school and you start working in offices, meeting people from other schools and become familiar with other architectural cultures than your own. Anyway, so Goff taught at Oklahoma, the University of Oklahoma, and he lived in Bartlesville. And in general, people don't like ordinary middle-class people. Certain kinds of rich people want an architect to design something that will give them prestige. I have a Zaha Hadid house. But middle-class people usually don't want to stick out like a sore thumb. They want to look like the neighbors. For some reason, they don't feel that way in Bartlesville, Oklahoma. So you go through Oklahoma, and there are these houses just, whoops, there's another Bruce Goff house. Here's the neighboring house, totally ordinary. Here's this weird thing. Here's this dog looking too embarrassed to be seen there. Now this one happens to be in Florida. Somebody's flying saucer landed on their property. It's one like a giant nerd.
Haven't seen any of these before. I'm not surprised.
Say again?
I said I haven't seen any of these before. Like never in my life.
Yeah, well, Goff is important enough that he should be mentioned.
Is this all Oklahoma?
Say again?
Are they all in Oklahoma?
Most of them. This one's in Florida, but the rest are in Oklahoma. Now, there's a term we use of a painter being painterly, that a painting might look like a painting. So here is So here's a Monet painting. Looks like a painting. Now, let's take something that was considered shocking. It's giving me a hard time maneuvering around here, sorry. And isn't it great how Google reads your mind? So this is a drip painting by Jackson Pollock, but it still looks painterly. Still looks like a painting. Now, let's go to a Frank Stella. And that doesn't look like the colors you see in a painting. In fact, he's not using painter's colors, he's using house paint colors. And then, of course, when does it stop really looking like official art? Andy Warhol's soup cans. So that, that isn't what we expect the painting to look like. So we have an expectation of what architecture should look like. And that's not what we see in Bruce Goff. So he'll do things like, in one of his churches, he gets dime store aluminum pie plates, punches holes in the center, strings them up to make a chandelier. Ding, 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 ding on these strings. You walk in and you say, oh my God, it's aluminum pie plates. He does one where there used to be, dime store used to sell a big square ashtray, about this big. Let's see if you don't see them anymore, but let's see if we can find one. Okay, so this was a cheap ashtray you could buy in a dime store. He would take a dozen of these, mount them, frame them, so that they are 3 across, 4 down, in a door, making it like a green emerald crystal door. And you grab it and say, oh my God, it's green ashtrays. Or, what do you put on the outside surface of a building? You put on siding. And siding, you want it to be durable. He would get purple indoor-outdoor patio carpet. Indoor-outdoor carpet will never deteriorate. It's like AstroTurf. It's this plastic that does not go anywhere. And he would staple gun that to the plywood, and that's his siding. It's going to last forever. So he does these totally non-conventional, non-builderly things. Well, Bruce Goff's most famous student was Herb Green. And Herb Green did what was called the turkey house, because it looks like a turkey. And finally, one more, just from like a couple years ago. Paolo Soleri. Paolo Soleri was an Italian. He did this ceramics factory in Italy when he was young, before he came here. He came to the American West, Arizona, and he started building in the desert. And the way he would build would be, he would get a bulldozer, make a mound, say, size this room or a little bigger. Then he'd lay rebars on it. He'd put broken crockery with the glazed side down on the dirt, space rebars away from that, put rebars over it, then pour concrete over the whole thing. Then go in and scoop out the dirt. And then he had an underground cave. And perfect for the Arizona climate, stays cool in the hot summer. So he built a huge complex of his center his store, his residence, called Casanti. And he supported himself making cast bronze bells, wind chimes. So you go there, you buy the wind chimes, and that supported it. And then in the 70s, when ecology became a thing, he said, I'm going to build Arco something. It's going to be ecological. So he just churned out these incredible drawings of this vision for a city of the future. There's a huge show of his work some years back at the Whitney. So these are from that catalog. Then he's been building it, not really, in the desert. So if you're driving on certain highways in Arizona, oh my God, there it is, it's on the cliff. So he, I don't know what they've been doing since he died, but they would have a program here where, you know, like the Pratt students could go spend 3 weeks over the summer, and you have concerts and cultural stuff and lectures. You work on construction, building these things, and work on designing it, etc. So Solari and Wright were friends.